Trainers are made in a place like this, a trainer factory. Trainers can be made from lots of different materials, like this shiny cloth called nylon, and this rougher material that's made out of cotton called canvas. And trainers come in lots of different colours. What colour trainers shall we make today? I like orange and red. First, the material is taken to the cutter press, where it can be cut to the right shapes. So Jen uses these cutters. They work just like cookie cutters. They're laid down in the correct spot and then pushed down by the head press to cut the shapes we need. Look how many shapes there are. But it doesn't look much like a pair of trainers, does it? I think this looks more like a beard, and this looks like a moustache. But that's because they all need to be sewn together. Linda uses a sewing machine to sew together the parts of the shoe that make the shoe upper. That's the bit that goes over the top of your foot. Linda's using this blue machine called an eyeliner. It makes holes in the shoe uppers for the laces. It works just like a hole punch, only it's much quicker. Oh, it's noisy, isn't it? Look, here are the holes for the laces. So next, the laces are threaded through the holes so they'll fit nice and tight. I'm going to have a practice at tying these laces. You want to practice with me. First of all, you make a knot, and then you use one lace to make a loop, take the other and loop it round, tuck it through the hole and pull. Like that. Now it's time to give the trainers their correct shape. First, they're put into a machine called the back part moulder. Can you guess what part of the trainer it shapes? That's right, it's the back part of the trainer where your heel goes. Next, they're put onto wooden moulds called lasts. They look just like real feet and will give the trainers the correct shape. Stefan fits the trainers onto the lasts, then puts them through 3 machines. One to shape the toe end, the next to shape the sides. And finally through the seat and side blaster, which stretches and attaches the material onto the inner sole underneath. That was amazing! But it was quite tricky to see from here, so I'm going to use my special camera on a long pole so we can see what it looks like from above. What an incredible machine. It looks like a robot insect with its pincers and claws folding the shoe together. All the rough bits of the shoe are then sanded off to make it nice and smooth. The underneath of the trainer is coated in a strong glue, which is then put through a heater to make it even stickier. The trainers are nearly ready, but to make sure they're comfortable to walk and run in, we have to stick the soles on. The soles are then pressed into place in this machine. And there we have a finished pair of bright, colourful trainers. All that's left to do is try them on. They fit perfectly. Ballet shoes are made here, in a ballet shoe factory. 600 pairs of ballet shoes here every week. That's enough ballet shoes to fit 20 classes of children at school. Today we're making ballet shoes out of this pink material called satin. It's lovely and shiny, isn't it? Here you go.
Okay.
First, Rob cuts big squares of satin from the roll and takes them to a machine called a cutting press. Rob uses a cutting press to cut out the pieces we need to make our ballet shoes. And these just work a bit like a cookie cutter. He places a cutter on the folded fabric and then uses the press to push down, and that cuts out the pieces. What do you think it sounds like? I think it sounds like someone shutting a big metal door. Rob also cuts out a shape for the soles of the ballet shoes. That's the part you stand on. Thank you. Now let's go see all these pieces put together. There are lots of sewing machines in this factory, and each one is set up to do a different job. First, Patricia is going to fold and sew the edges to make sure they're nice and neat. It's much quicker for Patricia to sew the edges by keeping all of the pieces strung together like this. They look a bit like clothes on a washing line, don't they? But now they have to be snipped apart with scissors. Julie then sews the top and side pieces of the ballet shoes together. Can you see how quickly the sewing machine can attach the two parts? Here we go. Next, Doreen sews the backs of the ballet shoes together. That's the bit where your heel goes. This bit is called zigzagging because the stitches make a zigzag pattern. The next machine does something called backstrapping. It sews a thin piece of fabric on the outside and the inside of the heel to cover up the zigzag. The last sewing machine does two jobs at once. It's set up so that it sews a piece of material around the edge of the shoe to keep things nice and neat. But also, it threads the drawstring at the same time. The drawstring is the piece of thread that you use to tighten or loosen the shoe, a bit like laces. Wasn't that amazing? It took all of those machines, each of them set up in a special way, to make this shoe. The top part of a ballet shoe is called an upper, and now it's time to attach it to the bottom part of a ballet shoe called the sole. This plastic block is called a last, and it gives the ballet shoe its shape. First, Phil is sticking on a sticky inner sole to the last, and he's pinning it in place so that it doesn't move around. Next, Phil takes the upper and he slips it onto the last and pulls in the edges so they stick to that inner sole. To make sure the sides are fully stuck down, Phil just bashes it with a hammer. And now, this is my favourite bit. Phil's using some pincers to gather the fabric at the toe of the shoe into neat little lines that we call pleats. There are 6 pleats on each side of the shoe. And then he cuts off the excess fabric with a knife. The last thing we need to do is stick on that outer sole which already has glue on it. A quick check and it's ready to go. Wow, Phil works so fast. He can make around 200 shoes a day. Last thing to do is sew the soles on the ballet shoes so they're strong enough to dance in. Thank you. Look, finished pair of ballet shoes. Don't they look great? This is where frames are made, in a glasses frame factory. There are hundreds of glasses frames being made here. Some are made by hand and some are made by machines. The frames start out as a wire called coil, and in this factory they use a type of metal called gold. But how does this turn into these? There are three main parts needed to make the frames. These round parts here are called the rim, and they hold the glass lens in place. And then these long sticks are called the temple because they run along the temple on your head. And then this middle bit is called the bridge because it sits a little bit like a bridge on your nose, and that holds the two rims together. It's Chandrika's job to put the temples together. First, the gold coil is cut to the right lengths to make all of our pieces, and she does that using a cutting machine. The pieces are then put into a machine called a knuckle stamper. It pushes down and to the side at the end of that piece of metal at the same time to create a little thump like this. Next, it's put inside this machine called a shin press, which squashes that knuckle so that it's smooth and flat. What do you think it sounds like? I think it sounds a bit like a train. Now it's time to make the part that goes over your nose, the bridge. They start out like this, as a straight piece of wire, and goes into this machine for the first bending. Here you go. In all, it takes 14 machines to bend the coil into exactly the right bridge shape. That's a lot of bending. And there you have it, a finished bridge. To make the rims, Ray feeds some more gold coil into this machine. It's called a rim winder. The gold coil is held in place in the machine, ready to be shaped. What shape do you think the rims are going to be? That's right, it's a circle. Now we've got all the parts we need to make our frames, but we need to put them all together. And for that we need something called a hinge. A hinge is a small joining part, and it's made by cutting the gold coil and putting tiny holes in it. The hinges are attached to the rims using something called soldering. This is where two pieces of metal are stuck together by melting another tiny piece of metal in between, just like glue. The hinged rims are then attached to the bridge, this time by making both pieces of metal really hot, so they melt and join together. This is called welding. For the first time, they're starting to look like frames, aren't they? But these aren't going to stay on very well. That's because they need the temples. The temples will be attached with screws, very tiny ones. These ones are smaller than an ant. So I've got my special camera with me. This is a microscope and it helps us to see very small things much bigger. Let's take a look. Wow, look at that. It is absolutely tiny. But now we can see all of the little grooves, and those are the bits that will screw into the parts so they stay together. They've been screwed into place. Look on my special camera. Can you see the screw on the frame? And look, that's the screw that's holding all the parts together. Oh, these look bright and shiny, don't they? But they do need some finishing touches. For the last stage, Chandrika puts on some plastic tips which are bent so they can hook around your ears, and some plastic pads for your nose. And ta-da! The frames are ready. But these ones are empty. That's because they need to get sent to the opticians who will fit the special lenses that will help your eyes so you can see things more clearly. These are really comfortable and I think they look pretty good too. To find out how a spacesuit is made, I've come here to a space museum.
Space begins around 60 miles above our planet Earth. In space, our bodies float, and there's no air to breathe outside a spacecraft. So astronauts have to wear spacesuits when they travel to space and when they work outside a spacecraft.
And this is a real-life, actual spacesuit. If we look here on the astronaut's arm, can you see there's a little mirror on a piece of elastic? They use it so they can see the controls on the front of the spacesuit, because as soon as they put the helmet on, they can't look downwards, so they need the mirror to be able to see. Now, because there's no air in space and we need air to breathe, the spacesuit will hold tanks of oxygen. And oxygen is in the air that we breathe, and it will flow into the suit so the astronaut can breathe easily. The material is really thick and very strong, but that's because it's made up of 14 layers of different materials. This shows us all 14 different layers, and can you see they sit on top of each other, a little bit like a sandwich. And this here has a tube running through it, and cold water runs through that tube, so when it sits against an astronaut's skin, it helps to keep them cool. This layer here is made of a material called ripstop, and it stops the astronaut suit from ripping. The next 7 layers are made of this silver, shiny material called mylar, and that traps heat inside the suit. And then this last layer here is really strong. It's fireproof and waterproof, so it's a little bit like astronaut armour. How brilliant is that?
It can be very cold out in space, so I'm going to show you just how the mylar material helps keep an astronaut warm.
Let's set this up just here. This is my special thermal imaging camera, and it shows me how hot or cold things are using different colours. Can you see, at the moment, my body is an orangey red colour, and that's because my body heat is escaping to the outside through my thin cotton clothes. So if an astronaut wore thin clothes like this in space, all of their body heat would escape and they would get very cold very quickly. So what do you think is going to happen when I wrap this big sheet of mylar around me? Let's find out.
Look, the thermal camera is showing the outside of the mylar as a bluey purpley colour.
What the mylar is doing is it's trapping my body heat inside and stopping it from escaping to the outside world. If I open the mylar up, you can see my body is still nice and warm, and that's why an astronaut spacesuit has 7 layers of mylar inside it to stop the astronaut getting cold.
This is a copy of a suit that an astronaut wears for launch and landing.
That's when they leave for space and come back again.
And I've got special permission to try it on. The launch suit has attachments on the front for air and electricity, a zip shaped like a V, and a sealed helmet to protect the astronaut. Ta-da! How do I look? And I even get to try on a real space glove.
The amazing thing about an astronaut's gloves is that they are made to fit each astronaut perfectly. And that means they can still wiggle their fingers so they can flick switches and press the buttons needed to launch a spacecraft.
The spacesuits are quite bendy too, thanks to these lines on the knees and elbows called pleats.
It's extra important for the astronauts to be able to bend their knees and their arms in this suit, because during launch and landing, they have to sit in this position for up to 6 hours.
Oh, maybe I could be an astronaut one day too.
Today I've come to a special hospital where they make different types of prosthetic legs for lots of different people.
They start with a three-dimensional or 3D picture of a person's leg that the new prosthetic leg has to fit.
And a 3D picture doesn't look flat, it looks like an object in the real world.
The first stage to making the prosthetic leg is to make a model of this 3D picture.
And the prosthetic leg we're making today is going to fit just below the knee, and then there'll be a shin and a foot at the bottom.
The model will be made from one of these foam blocks. It's Adam's job to set the block ready for cutting in a machine called a 3D carver.
But it can take quite a long time, so I'm going to use my special time-lapse camera. A time-lapse means that we can film something at a normal speed, but when we watch it back, we see it happen much more quickly.
Look! Can you see the model being cut out on my time-lapse camera?
It's really beginning to take shape, isn't it? Was incredible. The block is now the perfect model of the 3D picture that we saw earlier.
So Adam can now build the new prosthetic leg to fit that model.
The next part that Adam's making is called the liner, and the liner will fit over the person's legs, so it has to be nice and comfortable.
So it's made from this spongy foam, which Adam cuts, glues and shapes around the model on a machine called a vacuum former.
And the vacuum former is sucking the foam towards the model, making it a perfect fit. The next part to make is called the socket.
This is a hard shell, which is formed from 3 different materials: nylon, glass fibre and carbon fibre.
These are really, really strong. Before finishing the layers, Adam is going to put this metal part at the end of the leg, and it's called a claw. And this is where the shin and the foot will be attached later.
A final layer of nylon covers it all up.
All these materials are soft, aren't they? And we need the socket to be hard and strong. So to do that, Adam's going to cover it with a liquid called resin. Look, the resin is green.
And Adam pours the resin in through a bag.
It's like squeezing paint out of a tube. It looks brilliant, doesn't it? The resin is running underneath the bag, and it's mixing with the layers of nylon, glass fibre and carbon fibre. Once it's finished, the resin will be left to dry till it goes nice and hard.
An hour later, and the socket is ready.
The rest of the parts we need for our prosthetic leg are kept here in this storeroom, and here we are. This is the foot, and then this metal pole is going to be the shin. That's this part of the leg just here. Here we are. But first, Adam needs to cut the shin tube so the prosthetic leg can be the right length. And for that, he's using a saw. There it goes.
The shin tube is then fixed to the finished socket. And look, there's the liner going in too.
And here we have a finished prosthetic leg. Doesn't it look great? I really enjoyed learning about prosthetic legs and seeing how they were made. What was your favourite bit?
Do you remember the name of the picture that was used to make the prosthetic leg? That's right, it's called a 3D picture. Did you hear the sound the saw made when Adam cut the metal shin tube to the right length? And did you see how the liquid resin soaked into the socket to make it hard and strong?